Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Liz Fernandez with Professional People Training, and I would also like to welcome you to today's webinar. We have two speakers today. Joe Hudyncia is an environmental program specialist with the North Carolina Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services since April of 2015. In that role, he addresses environmental and natural resource issues affecting North Carolina agriculture and advises the Commissioner of Agriculture and other department officials on environmental issues associated with agriculture and agribusiness. Joe also works collaboratively with experts in multi-agency divisions, representatives from cooperating programs, and industry partners within the state and across the country in developing and maintaining capabilities for protection of animal health, mitigation of impacts from animal health emergencies, and response and recovery during agricultural emergencies. Joe serves as departmental lead in the role of subject matter expert for mass mortality composting. He holds an MS degree in plant pathology from North Carolina State University and a BS in environmental and forest biology from SUNY College of Environmental Science and Forestry at Syracuse University. Our second speaker is Robert Ross. Robert graduated from North Carolina State University in 1994 with a Bachelor of Science in Forest Management. He has 15 years of experience with private forest industry and 12 years of experience with the North Carolina state government. His background includes land management, private forest landowner assistance, wood procurement, and forest water quality. Currently, he serves as the Forest Market and Utilization Staff Forester with the North Carolina Forest Service at the Raleigh headquarters. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Joe and Robert.
Well, great. Thank you, Liz, and thanks, everyone. Thank you to the USDA Veterinary Services National Training and Exercise Program for having us today. Today, we'd like to share with you some experiences and lessons learned with composting mass animal mortalities and ag emergency response. And we'd also like to talk about what we've learned on acquiring carbon materials and how we're planning and preparing for future events. So with that, I'm Joe Hudyncia with North Carolina Department of Agriculture.
And I'm Robert Ross with the North Carolina Forest Service, which is also a part of the Department of Agriculture.
So we'll get started here. So this timeline is also represents a sort of an overview of what we'll talk about today. This is an overview of the past 6 years of North Carolina efforts with composting for animal ag emergencies, starting with the high-path avian influenza event in 2015, and then looking at back-to-back hurricanes in 2016 and 2018 and their impact on the poultry industry here in North Carolina. A quick look at some ASF preparedness things that we're doing, a brief look at the low-path avian influenza event, and we're going to talk more extensively about our carbon task force work here in the department. And sort of the overarching theme here is that if composting is a response, it does require large amounts of carbon material. Do you want to view this in the context of all disposal options? Certainly all disposal options are considered. This is our 2017 North Carolina Plan for Catastrophic Natural Disasters. I don't want to dive deep into that, just to say that composting does fall within the context of all the options. And on this particular graphic, you can see that those options with 3 stars rank the highest in priority for our response plan. So certainly in a natural disaster, use of rendering and landfills for mortality to the largest extent possible, and then with composting on site as well. And certainly composting will rank high if we were talking about foreign animal disease response as well. I really just want to take a quick look about just a brief look at composting and how it sort of fits into our framework. You know, the avian influenza outbreak in 2015 really brought composting front and center for the U.S. and for all the states, not just the states that were impacted, but all of them. And certainly, you know, we can go back to Delaware and in the mid-2000s in Virginia and West Virginia with the really proof that this would work there. Overwhelming majority of impacted animals in 2015 were composted. In Minnesota, over 99%, and in Iowa, the vast majority. And then continuing on to more recent events, the low-path, high-path event in Indiana, where 10 of 11 farms composted the animals, and then recently here, about a year ago, the low-path event in North Carolina, where we had all 11 farms that were impacted composted in-house. And so just bringing composting front and center for us. I have to give a shout out to a hugely important partnership here, something I've called the National Compost Team. And this was born during the 2015 event, led by USDA and with state, federal, private contributors, a real collaborative process. It was informed by events of 2015 and 2016. Folks were calling in straight from the field. The idea there was to develop and refine these response tools for HPAI and certainly all, well-researched science-based resources. And if you look through that, the link is provided there. Certainly there are some a variety of protocols and job aids and standard forms that are used in response, and you'll even find a few things related to carbon source materials in those. And so this really became the foundation for our response, along with some of our stateside folks getting involved in the USDA compost subject matter expert training. And that provided sort of the foundation there. And in 2015, the outbreak started in the winter and the spring months with that northward migration of the waterfowl. And our expectation here was that there would be mixing of birds from the different flyways. You could see the 4 flyways represented there with some crossover in the Northland. The expectation is that this virus could ride back in the fall and winter migration. And so we were considered under an imminent threat through the fall of 2015 and well into spring of 2016. Really drove our preparations. And instead, in 2016, we were blessed with Hurricane Matthew, or cursed. It brushed the coast as a Cat 1 storm in an area that was already saturated with from a series of thunderstorms, and 25 North Carolinians lost their lives. Brought flooding that hadn't been seen since Hurricane Floyd in 1999, and it produced a 500-year flood event in some areas. Here on this slide, you can see the areas of heaviest rainfall in the 10 to 20-inch range, and certainly that coincided with our greatest areas of impact. And so here we activated our Emergency Operations Center for that event in a big way. It's an all-hands-on-deck endeavor, and we integrate the Forest Service, who brings the ICS structure to the response, and like you can see, just a lot of people, a lot of resources. As the impacts to the poultry industry became apparent, that we knew that we needed to do something big, and so all of the preparations that we had done for composting made it a logical choice for us. And so our approach, as it unfolded, was to provide carbon materials for composting and to provide subject matter experts to help those impacted farms. We went to FEMA for assistance with that, and some of the basics there. You can see the county shaded in red as a very extensive disaster area declaration in a little bit more than half of the state. So it required a major disaster declaration at the federal and the state level. We needed a waiver from landowners to operate on private property with public funds. This was done under Category B, emergency measures, with an endorsement letter from public health and environmental quality. And our goal there was to address the potential threat to public health and the environment. So we went to FEMA for the resources, and this was the first time North Carolina had gone big on composting for emergency response. On the surface, it looks fairly simple, but there are a lot of moving pieces. a lot of equipment and person hours. It's a lot of work, and all of that carbon material movement to do this work was coordinated and managed out of the IMT. If we take, just basically a three-phase approach. There's, cover it, get it started to dry, add incrementally, incorporate material, and then develop compost windrows. And you can imagine all of the hours that it takes to do that work in a typical poultry house. Just some quick highlights there. So there were 1.8 million poultry that were impacted. During that event, we worked with 16 different vendors. There were many small local vendors, but we did have one big vendor that was a major supplier. And we ended up moving about 87,000 cubic yards of carbon material. The mortality management group in ops, along with logs and finance, really worked that whole piece. We had 14 compost experts, mostly stateside, some from Ag Cooperative Extension and our environmental agency. And we did incorporate a training contract where we had our superstar SME have folks come in and shoulder to shoulder on our biggest site to train up to do that, the SME work out at Prems on their own. And we really ended up, we were looking for carbon sources on the fly, and we just went for it. And that response lasted for several months. Some of what we learned, so yes, composting is effective for hurricane response, and we knew that we would use that approach going forward. The HPAI preparations were invaluable. Like I say, the USDA resources there and the collaborative work across states is absolutely invaluable for us. We gained significant experience during this event with carbon materials movement and with composting poultry mortality at a large scale. Some concerns, so, our complete management really took key personnel away from their normal duties for, as much as a couple months. And so we thought, could we contract out some of the components of that response in the future and get the IMT to focus on response coordination and speed? We knew that we needed to learn more about these carbon material sources and trucking and what it takes to move those materials. And we also knew that we needed some experienced cleanout crews, the folks to do the work quickly and safely. We had left that up to the farms to do for this event. And so we figured in 15 or 20 years we might be able to practice what we had learned. And sure enough, just 2 very short years later, we had Hurricane Matthew. And this one produced even more rain, so this was in the order of 500 to 1,000-year flooding events. And it did impact a wider area. This graphic represents the farms across 14 counties that were impacted during Florence, stretching from our sand hills to lower Piedmont and then mostly in the coastal plains here in North Carolina. This is some of the aerial shots from Florence at some of the poultry farms that were impacted. Interestingly, 75% of the buildings that were flooded were not in any recognized floodplain. And I think that's what happens when you're into 500,000-year events. So although the initial Emergency Operations Center was like I had showed you several slides ago for Matthew, it quickly transitioned into a field ops center for our work right in the heart of the impacted area. And then we moved, for Florence, we moved to a model incorporating lessons learned from Matthew, where we coordinated and oversaw 3 specialized contractors. They are the subject matter expertise for composting, the carbon hauler, and the cleanup crews. And certainly this became a more complex operations with more farms. We added in the clean-out operations. The carbon contractor, we worked with them. IMT worked with them and kind of worked together to scan the landscape, and we weren't perfect at it, but we did work together to make that go. These, one of the contractors we had provides USDA APHIS trained and certified experts from across the country. you might see some faces here that you recognize, the outstanding folks. And they play a central role in our disposal response. And they bring site-specific resource requests to the IMT, and they guide the composting operations on the farm, and it really is central to what we do in the operations. Our carbon materials contractor, who will source, schedule, and deliver the materials, we did find a contractor that specializes in hauling and has extensive experience with FEMA work, and they did the carbon sourcing with help from the IMT. They were new to carbon hauling, but they adapted quickly. And of course, I have that little box in here that's just to depict the amount of tracking that it takes for robust documentation. It's nice when you have a highly qualified contractor that can take that on. And then the removal and hauling crews, you know, in our opinion, we want these folks who do this work for a living. That's the type of folks that we want to bring into a response. This work is unique, and it can be complex, and there's a lot of specialized equipment. And trust us, there's a lot of skill involved here, and there's a need for speed and for safety in these unique working conditions. So just a brief look at Florence here, a little over 4 million poultry. We had 58 farms that requested assistance through our program. And we ended up moving almost twice as much material as we did in Matthew, about 140,000 cubic yards of material. And we did that work through the regional command center. Like I said, we had those 3 main contracted pieces, and this was mostly complete in 35 days, which was, we thought that was a good time frame. Certainly met the expectations for timeliness. And so a couple of lessons learned there. You know, working with FEMA, we've had a chance to do this a couple of times, and we know to engage early. You know, maybe even before landfall, we can have a plan ready to submit, get pre-approval of that response plan so there's some certainty on the finance side, and then bring the expert contractors in to do that work with the IMT coordination. And then we like the regional command center and lots of interaction between the contractors with morning and afternoon meetings there at the command center. And with carbon materials, you know, it was a little bit of time getting started up, but once we hit our stride, we were really moving material. We discovered that the haul distance was critical, and that our most expensive material was free material because it came from farthest away. Farm reassessment, periodic reassessment, and critical order, incremental ordering is a smart way to go about that, to feed the crews where there's a need, but don't overshoot the need. And then we still came out of this one saying we need to identify more carbon sources. I just wanted to jump over to the low-path avian influenza outbreak here in North Carolina in 2020, where we had 11 impacted prems, about 268,000 birds. They were all ended up being composted in-house for both 14-day cycles. And for that event, we moved a little over 29,000 yards of material to do that work. And, of course, that was a joint state and federal response. And fortunately, it stayed a more localized event in 2 counties. And just a couple things to point out there. We certainly recognize the value of skilled contractors with a farm background and the right equipment to do this work. The conditions here with pole barns and low ceilings and big birds and lots of material, you need people with skills. Certainly the SME role is critical out on farms during the disease response work. Like I said, all the birds were composted in-house. With carbon materials, we had an integrator had some forest product ties, so that we kind of lucked into a good situation there. He knew the trucking industry, he knew the sources, and so that really helped facilitate movement. We did find a double ground mulch source at a nearby landfill that became one of our primary sources, and we did pull a lot of sawdust material from a sawmill in South Carolina. One thing we noted is that we were competing with normal business with the haulers to move that material. And so while they were very happy to jump in and do big movements on the front side, as we wanted to order lesser amounts of material later on, we found ourselves competing even more with their normal operations. But certainly the most important point, I think, is that our foreign animal disease planning, our hurricane response work, taking our after-action reviews seriously, and all of the composting experience, I think that added significant value to this disease event response to this disease. And you know, skilled contractors are innovative. I love this picture. These are the type of people that you want to work with in a response. This was during the avian influenza response, and one of our contractors was creative enough to find a snowblower rig attached to the front end of the skid steer and move in and save a ton of turning inside of a house. Just the type of people you want to work with. And so as we continue to look forward, you know, on any given day in our eastern counties, there are 4.8 million hogs, 64.5 million chickens, 10.6 million turkeys. This is why we continue to do so much pre-planning. There's a significant amount of poultry and swine concentration east of our I-95 corridor, and this is one of the densest concentrations of protein production in the world. And so with the threat to these industries, you know, forward planning continues to be critical. So I'm going to finish up here, just taking a quick look at some of the ASF preparedness. A lot of you have been involved in that, and we continue to move forward. I could talk about this in its own webinar, but I'll just say, you know, that we did 3 of the horizontal grinder demonstrations here with a partnership with the folks in Virginia and USDA, and lots of folks came together to do the proof of concept and start to look at throughput, and certainly EPA as a partner looking at the potential for pathogen movement. We did a train-to-trainer composting SME event in 2019 where we tried to get some of the swine industry folks familiar with the composting concepts. And certainly we participated, as many have, with regional and national work groups. You know, continue to, if you think about African swine fever and the potential impact, certainly if you might compost, there will be large amounts of carbon materials needed there. And so I'm just about done, and I'm almost ready to turn you over to Robert. I just want to say, you know, that here we have plentiful options for carbon sources. Other geographies in the country will have different materials, be it, you know, oat hulls, corn stover, various types of material. But the bottom line is that it's got to have a carbon value. It's got to have the right physical properties. There can't be contaminants. It's got to be a consistent material, and it's got to be suitable for land application when all is said and done, and you've achieved what you wanted to achieve. So I would say, you know, the perfect carbon material is for emergency composting is probably going to be the hardest one to find, and it could very well be the most expensive. I would say work with the SME team to find materials that are readily available in large quantities within a reasonable hauling distance that will achieve their intended purpose. And I'll turn it over to Robert at this point.
Good afternoon, everyone. Again, I'm Robert Ross with the North Carolina Forest Service. The North Carolina Forest Service is a division of the Department of Agriculture. And let's see. Let's talk about locating sources of carbon. We understand that all states may not have the forest products industry that North Carolina has, but we hope that our approach will be helpful. Probably the first step that we would recommend in this process is to contact the state forestry agency. A forest markets and utilization staff forester within a state agency should already have a up-to-date list of the primary wood processors and already have key contacts for those facilities. And you can see on our website, we have a list that is accessible right on our website of all the primary processors. You can see at the red arrow there at the bottom of the screen. Another option would be to go through the U.S. Department of Agriculture, U.S. Forest Service. Annually, the U.S. Forest Service does a survey. It's called the Timber Production Output Survey. And this is a survey that is taken upon a subsample of all the primary wood processing facilities within a state. Therefore, the U.S. Forest Service maintains an active, up-to-date list of primary wood processing facilities in a state. However, it may not have up-to-date key contacts, people to contact, and telephone numbers. It may just have a listing of the primary wood processing facilities, their physical location, and the products that they produce. So it may not be as intact as what a state agency may have. Another option would be a university wood products department. Many universities have a wood products department, and they maintain lists of the wood processing facilities throughout the state. They also will have a list of the secondary wood processors. So there is a difference. A primary wood processor usually takes round wood and converts it into the first product. So it could either be a sawmill, a chip mill, a paper mill would all fall in that primary wood processor category. A secondary wood processor could be lumber yards, mulch plants, planing mills, where they've taken it to a further end state in the wood processing process there. So, and then another would be the Primary Forest Products Network. Now, this is a web-based application. You can access it through the Southern Group of State Foresters, and it does have a downloadable list of the facilities in each state. It also has secondary processors, which is most helpful too. Both primary and secondary are listed on this website. The only drawback to the Forest Products Network is sometimes the data can be around 5 years old, and that may not be the most current data available. But it is an option if you're looking to create a list of the potential carbon sources in your state. Another resource is in North Carolina, we have the Department of Environmental Quality, and they have permitted composting facilities mapped across the state on their website. Now, the good thing about these sources is that this carbon may be low cost or even free, but you would probably in most or all cases have to provide for a means of loading the material, hauling the material, and then the documentation, of course, for financial purposes. And some of this material was used during the low-path incident in 2020. One thing we did in North Carolina is we grouped the carbon sources into Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3 categories. Now, this is a subjective ranking of companies with the most carbon material. A Tier 1 would be a company with the highest or the largest volumes of carbon material. And then 2 would be kind of a medium facility, and a 3 would not have as much carbon material, be on the lower end. It is important to note that large sawmills may not necessarily be a Tier 1. A large sawmill may have all its mill residuals, its bark, chips, shavings, sawdust, contracted to secondary markets. So I wouldn't automatically assume that a large sawmill, say one that did in excess of 100 million board feet annually, would be a Tier 1. You would need to call and find out if they were actually had the amount of carbon that would put them in a Tier 1 category. Let's talk a little bit about primary processors if we look on the left-hand side of the screen. So your primary processors are sawmills, chip mills, pulp and paper mills, plywood, shavings, pellet mills. We have 5 pellet mills here in North Carolina. Oriented strand board, or OSB for short, and the products that they are producing are bark, sawdust, shavings, and chips. The quantity that these processors have is mill specific. Like we said, a lot of the mills we have visited, the bark, sawdust, shavings and chips are directly loaded into vans, and they are hauled away as soon as the trailer or van gets full. So they may not keep a whole lot on site. As far as processing the material to another material, they may only have a screening capability. They may not do any grinding. Screening is pretty common, though. And on-site storage could be limited, as we said. They may there's some permitting restrictions where they may not be able to hold as much carbon material on site for long periods of time. Also, load-out capability where they could load a truck may be somewhat limited. They're used to unloading trucks, mainly round wood, and then either sawing or processing it into their primary wood product. Also, we found in some lessons learned is that a lot of their material is contracted or allocated to other markets, and it's not it's probably not the best means to assume that you can get their carbon if they have it. They may already have it contracted to another vendor. And also seasonality. There is a less demand for residuals in the winter. As you move into spring, the residuals that these primary mills produce is in high demand by the secondary processors. So if you have an incident that occurs in the late winter, early spring, it might be hard to get carbon from those facilities. Moving over to secondary processors, these could be mulch plants, green waste compost manufacturing plants, boiler fuel, chip manufacturing plants, planer mills, biomass power plants, and pallet manufacturing plants, just to name a few. And they're mainly going to have mulch, bark, compost, and woody waste. They typically have high quantities of this material, but it is going to be more expensive than it would be from a primary processor. On-site storage, they should have large volumes there most of the time, and they have the ability to load trucks. Now, of course, they do have markets for their products. As you can imagine, much of the mulch and bark and compost go to our big box stores such as Lowe's Home Improvement and the Home Depot, places like that. And, of course, seasonality then comes into play with a high demand in the spring as homeowners are using their products as summer rolls in. And the good thing about secondary processors, they may have single or multiple sites spread out across broader geographic areas, and they should have the capacity to produce more product during a time of emergency. We call this surge capacity. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later. So building relationships with primary wood processing facilities, we first had to get a list, and then we have to start calling these people and talking to them, introducing ourselves, and what the nature of our call is. So just contacting the mills is a cold call. I introduce myself and who I work with and the nature of the call and the importance. I typically have a rehearsed statement, and the one that I use most common is the North Carolina Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services is looking for potential carbon sources in the event of disaster or disease outbreak for composting mass animal mortality. That way they know exactly what I'm calling about, and from there is to determine if that mill or facility is even able to provide carbon during an incident. Some mills may not be able to, and that's a good question to get out of the way really quick. If they can, if they're willing to help, or maybe they are interested in learning more, need to find out who is the key contact. Is it someone in management or wood procurement? And you want to have somebody that can react when you call them, that can coordinate with upper level management and make decisions. Because when you do call during an incident, you'll probably need the material in an expedited manner. So And also, as I've said before, be mindful that these mills will probably have contracted their residuals to secondary markets, and that there are commitments, either verbal or contracted commitments and supply agreements and contracts that they have to their typical vendors for the products that they are producing. And so I never really expect to divert carbon from prearranged or contracted markets. We have a mill survey that we send to the facility where we can get more detailed information about that facility, the products they make, and the amount and the volume, how much they keep on site, and availability. One thing that's very important is as you send these surveys out and they begin to come back into you, you want to have a good way of organizing these surveys and be able to file them for future reference, especially during an incident. You'll need to refer back to the surveys to find out more about the facilities. Then a good thing to do is schedule a mill visit. Go by and meet the individuals face-to-face. That's been a challenge with COVID-19, but we've actually done around 7 or 8 mill visits since 2020. And we encourage or recommend that it's just good to be flexible and schedule meetings that best fit their schedule. Be prepared to meet outdoors in areas such as wood yards. You may get a chance to meet inside. It's a good idea to bring personal protective equipment such as hard hats, closed-toed shoes, wear safety glasses and a safety vest. We have handouts and a presentation to describe the whole process of composting, and we can also drive home the message of the types of products we're looking for, the volumes that we're looking for, be able to look at the material that they have on site and talk about surge capacity if they were chosen to be a supplier during an event. Anticipate a lot of questions. Typically, the supplier will have numerous questions about the types of carbon. The carbon that he has, is it what we need? Does he have enough amount of the carbon that is needed? There'll be a lot of questions about logistics, billing, purchasing. And for us, it's been key to track these communications, to manage our sent and return surveys, and keep up with the mills visited. That way we can always refer back, know which mills we may need to do a follow-up on, or who's filled out a survey, who has not filled out a survey. So keeping track of all this has been key for pre-planning. So we have a centralized place to keep all our spreadsheets, all our documents, our surveys, and that's been a big help as well. Tracking and pre-planning, you'll see the picture of the spreadsheet in the upper right. That one spreadsheet for the North Carolina Carbon Task Force, it is a master spreadsheet. It has all the primary wood processing facilities in the state that we feel would be sources of carbon. It has the key contacts. It has the latitude and longitude of those facilities, and we also have a notes section where we can put in specific notes about the facility or conversations. We can track our mill visits. We can track whether they've completed a survey. It's important, though, to annually keep this spreadsheet up to date and to reconnect with the mills on an annual basis to make sure we have correct key contact information. Things change. People go to work for other companies, or they retire, or so it's always good to have up-to-date information, and that's good to do on an annual basis. We can also track mill status. Sometimes mills become temporarily idle. They could be sold to another entity. They can be permanently closed, so we can track all that on one spreadsheet. Key contacts, as I mentioned, we need to make sure those are up to date and that nothing has changed from year to year. Also, available carbon that mill has capacities and productions can change. They can go up or down. Residuals that may be contracted to different markets, and that can affect availability. So keeping track of that is very important. We may have to at times add or delete facilities that are closed or go out of business. And the main thing is to continually build relationships from past incidents and foster new relationships for future incidents. So we periodically make contact with the vendors, and that's just a good habit that we've gotten into. Let's talk about our survey. This survey is a 5-page survey and is currently under revision. We're trying to make a better survey that will more accurately get the data that we need and also use terminology that the supplier typically uses. And this survey, if anyone is on the call is interested in seeing the survey or the new draft that we're working on, just feel free to reach out to either myself or Joe, and we'd be glad to send you a copy of the survey that we created here in the North Carolina Department of Agriculture, and we've been using for quite some time now. As you can see, it's the first page is pretty common information, and you basically want to know information about the mill, mailing addresses, emails, who the key contact is, telephone numbers. It asks some questions about the layout of the facility, what types of products that they produce, what kind of post-processing do they do? Do they have screening or grinding of the woody material to make it into a different product that might even be better for composting? What are their loading capabilities? Can they load a lot of trucks, or is space limited? Hauling. If the facility has their own trucks, that would be great to contract with them to have, they just turnkey bring the material to the farm where it's unloaded and you can go right to work with it. If they don't have hauling, you'll have to arrange for subcontractors to go to the facility to pick up the material. We ask questions about site access. Can they work extended hours? Do they have the capability of surge capacity? Can they ramp operations up and produce more material in a time of need? Of course, we want to know kind of inventory by each product. How much bark, how much mulch, how much sawdust, how much chips do they have on site? And then also in the survey, we ask a lot of questions on billing procedures. Maybe they have an office administrator that we need to be working with on that. So, you know, maybe a different personnel we're working with on billing, on administrative purposes. Now, these surveys can be completed by the facility, by the mill, and they can send them back, or we may do an on-site visit and we fill the survey out right there face-to-face. Either way works well. So. This is the last page of our survey, and this is more of a notes page, and it has become a very important part of the survey. You see, it allows you to list the different products on the far left. You can see they have microchips, they have shavings, and I believe that's some of Joe's handwriting, so sometimes it's hard to read. But then you go into type. Looks like most of what they do there is pine, and they also have some mixed hardwood at that facility. You can list the size of the material that they're producing, estimate moisture contents, because all that will be important for composting. You want to know kind of what their daily processing capacity is, how much of that are they producing. And that middle column, that daily surge capacity, for this example, shows us that they can actually produce twice as much in a time of need. So that's a good thing to know when we're in an incident. So as I said, the last page is a great notes page for either when you're on site or on the telephone with these individuals finding out more about their operation. And I'll switch back to Joe. We're going to talk about transport.
Wow, thank you, Robert. Fantastic information. I just want to say we kind of skipped over. We had a slide that talked about what we call as our carbon task force, and Robert represented that fantastically. He certainly has helped what we call the task force tremendously. So we appreciate the support from our North Carolina Forest Service there. We have on that task force we have folks from emergency programs, environmental programs, veterinary division, and some other agency folks like our environmental quality, or even our carbon contractor that can join us for specific meetings with on certain topics. So, like I said, the task force really is trying to learn the landscape, find these sources, make those contacts, and know where that stuff is when we need it. Just want to touch here on transport. In Hurricane Florence, I think at the peak of the event, we moved over 140 walk-in floor trailers a day at our peak. So transport is a big moving piece. You think about 140 truck movements to farms in a single day. We've had so far good luck with a single contractor with a high capability, a large number of trucks, the ability to surge to whatever size that event might be. We have a national disaster contractor that has shown us the greatest capability thus far, and we like to let them know that we prefer that they can subcontract with some of our local and regional companies, and keep some of that in work in the state. Certainly that transport contractor needs a very strong office with lots of capability there. I'm talking, like at least three folks dedicated to that type of support, if not more. And a big question is, can they move away from their normal business to do this response? And there are contractors here that can't, and they won't. But there are some out there, obviously, that will. I say the strong office piece because of the documentation that's required not only for us stateside, but for the FEMA reimbursement. Things like the, load verification or truck certification, load tickets. Even for FEMA, it's likely that if you operate with FEMA funds, that you'll need to do third-party observer. They do make that, offer that or cover that as part of contracting with them, I believe. But what that amounts to is every load of carbon material that leaves the supplier facility is observed and accounted for, and every load that arrives at its destination is observed and accounted for. That can be a pretty hefty thing all by itself, and we're still working on that piece. And then with invoicing, the load and hauling and, the carbon orders and load tickets and dates and capacities, and it just goes on and on, all of those pieces of that robust documentation that we need there. The big experienced contractor has brought that to us. The IMT in the response, like I talked with our Hurricane Florence response, we like that regional command center, bringing those contractors together. We envision going forward that there'll be a liaison. It'll probably be Robert from our carbon task force, who will be in an IMT role to advise that hauling contractor. We want them to shoulder up, and we want to bring what we've learned to them and stay in that. We envision that the carbon supplier, the IMT, are going to use that carbon task force supplier database, some GIS tools that we're developing, which includes some mapping to assist transport. And really, we want to minimize that haul distance. On a daily way, in that command center, we're looking for that synchronicity between the incident management team and those contractors. We talked about the subject matter experts, the carbon hauler and the clean-out crews, and the way that we we've done that in the way that it's envisioned going forward. Those morning and afternoon meetings, those of you that are well-versed in ICS are familiar with that. We get them up at the board in a facilitated way to work together to make the plan of attack for what is happening, and then bring in what happened back into the afternoon meetings. Work on prioritizing farms together, plans for, access, drop locations, even on a particular site. And like I said before, keeping the incremental flow to supply your crews, but don't overshoot your need. And, of course, always projecting your needs in advance, today, tomorrow, and the day after. And a lot of that can be done with those facilitated meetings at the board. We're working, this is just a sort of a mock-up of where we're headed with this, but this integrates everything that Robert talked about with our database of all of the information we've collected from the suppliers, and that becomes linked into this tool, which where all these facilities are interactive in this interactive interface, and they can actually click on any of those facilities, come up and get some real quick information on those facilities. We're trying to decide what information we can populate that with that becomes useful for the IMC, and other things. We're looking at envisioning this communicating or at least taking information from our animal health programs database and bringing in some of our prem information that we can put in there. We've got our suppliers, and then hopefully we saw a little mock-up yesterday of a really neat tool that the group is headed with, which would do mapping, and so we can go from a supplier to a farm, and we can map that out. So we're just really excited about some of the functionality that'll bring to us and bring to the response. And I'm just about wrapping it up here. From our after-action review that we did with Hurricane Florence, I had mentioned earlier, the proximity of the carbon sources to the farms is a big deal. In red on this graphic are the suppliers that we worked with during Florence. And then the blue zones around those red triangles represent a 30-mile drive distance, a 30-mile haul distance. And we've started to think about this 30-mile distance being magical in that it gives us, it controls our transport costs, and it also gives us more truck movements per day out of a single truck. And when you combine those two, it puts us, we think, in that sweet spot for moving carbon materials. So as you can see here, there's a lot of space left on this map coming out of Florence, and this really was the beginning of the Carving Task Force. So we looked at each other and we said, how do we cover more of that map with blue? How do we get more sources within 30 miles of, these concentrations of farms? That became the goal of the Carbon Task Force. And just a little bit more recently, this is an overlay of some newly identified sources in green with a 30-mile zone. It just sort of continues. It shows that, the task forces continue to assess and verify new sources and add those up. The next time that I give this presentation, I hope I can have the whole thing green. So we're out there. We continue to do the work, and we talked yesterday about scheduling more site visits. And just to wrap it up, just a couple of parting thoughts here. So certainly natural disaster and animal disease events can overwhelm farm capabilities. And so, us as response agencies, we need to think ahead and need to think big. We like to use contractors with significant skills and capability. We talked about those. We think that skilled contractors are the key to an efficient, safe, and speedy response. Awarding contracts ahead of time, so if as we continue to work with FEMA for disaster-type work, we've learned that pre-awarded contracts actually are reimbursed by FEMA at a higher rate. And so if we can get our work done and get it done ahead of time, On the reimbursement side, we'll even be a little bit better off. Like I said, use the contractor so that IMT can focus on coordination. And for composting response, have a planning team identify the carbon sources in important geographic regions ahead of time, like Robert talked to you about. Maintain those relations, know who to contact in an emergency, and then bring the work of that planning team, which we call our carbon task force, but whatever that planning team would be, bring that to the response. And with that, that was it. Thank you.
And we've got a lot of questions for you, so let's begin. Are the farms across the state less impacted as the location is farther away from the coast? Given future extreme weather events being anticipated because of climate change, what is North Carolina doing to decrease consequences from these?
Well, yeah. So on that last point, we put extensive efforts on the swine side, identifying farms in the floodplain, and actually having a program to help turn that into a conservation easement agreement so there's no longer a swine farm. That farm can continue to operate, but we take that vulnerability out of the landscape there. I would say that our most recent events, I talked about Matthew and Florence, they were primarily coastal events and they were primarily flooding events, but with a hurricane, we've had those that have come up through our Piedmont or our mountains. So this can happen anywhere in our landscape. And, we had 2 flooding events, but we could, things could be more on the wind side, and so that changes too, and we have to think about what that would change.
The next question is, did all the water in and on the ground affect the composting process?
We do the best we can on a site, and usually we can find an area where you can locate those windrows and get them up and out. We've used like logging maps to cross areas that weren't so good to get to areas that are good. And sometimes if we can't get outside, we plead to stay inside the houses. And that's not always the most popular option, but sometimes that decreases the environmental vulnerability. But that's where, our subject matter experts and all of that site-specific assessment that they do really brings that together in a way that'll work for that farm.
Which carbon material did you find worked well? We found wood chips from tree trimmers to work well for mass composting in Pennsylvania.
Yes, absolutely. In Hurricane Matthew, we had a lot of good luck with what they call dirty chips. We talked about those. They're, just basically land clearing activities, and everything is chopped up. Yes, that works really well. Big sawdust sources for Hurricane Matthew. Mulch is not always a great all-around material, but it can do good for work on a base and with capping, and can be blended to do some of the work in a core. Trying to think of what else that we've used to a significant extent. Smaller chips, larger chips, shavings. Sometimes it's hard to get your hands on the shavings, but people who have those like to hold on to those. So that's some of the major sources that we've used.
The next question is, how are the composted mortalities after 1-2 years and currently, like piles reduced in height from, say, 3 feet high to 1 feet high? And they're referring to the 2018 hurricane.
I'm not sure I understand that one. Is it just talking about how does the pile change from when it's initially set up to when it's basically done?
I think piles reduced in height, I think that's their question. So we'll see if they can write in another question about that.
Yeah, I will just say offhand that, over a composting period of 3 to 4 weeks, we will see the pile that started at a height of 7 or 8 feet is going to be down to 6 feet, something like that. So you do see that generally maybe 20–25% sort of overall volume reduction.
Okay. Did you do any shallow burial in connection with emergency mortality? If so, would you rate that as having been successful, a good method for the future?
Everything that we've done so far has been on a sort of a pilot or an experimental basis, and we've worked with our friends north of the border in Virginia on that. Very encouraging results with what we've seen so far. It's got a lot of folks interested. It's in our plans. It could be used, but at this point in time, it's been experimental or demonstration, but like I say, very encouraging what we've seen.
Okay. The next question is the Carbon Source survey and website hosted at NCDA Department of Ag or the Forestry Department?
The survey is, I don't believe it is posted on the website for the public to get, so we would need to email the survey to you. Now, the list of primary wood processors, that is on the Forest Service website.
Okay. There's another question. How many people are on the task force?
That group, most typically there are about 5 of us that are in that room working together. But like I said, that can grow. I would say that's our core group, but that can grow as we reach out to other folks. I mentioned wanting to bring in perhaps the contractor ahead of the sort of our anticipating hurricane season or something like that, and also our folks in our environmental agency and other specialists that we think might bring value. So a core group of about five or so people with the ability to call in folks that can bring value to that effort.
Is there information out there about good carbon sources other than the forestry industry? For example, the Plain States have little to no forestry industry.
Yeah. So that's part of that due diligence, getting out and understanding what's there. So yeah, I understand that. We're lucky here with the forest products industry that we have here, and I would say in an area we learned indirectly from the 2015 avian influenza event that there was good success with, say, corn stover or oat hulls, and some of the ag crop residual type material. And so that would take maybe some legwork with some folks to understand the time period when that's available, whether or not it's kept in significant volume, who might be the type of company or group that might aggregate those types of materials in a way that you could scale up with. It would take some legwork to learn where those are. Like I said, here we're predominantly focused on forest products.
And the last question that we have in the chat is, I assume most or all of the contracting is originated and serviced by the state. Has there been any federal agency contracting of these vendors? And have you been able to be reimbursed for the contracting expenses by USDA and LPA events?
No and yes.
Yeah, so for the low path work, the joint state federal response, that was USDA resources and stateside resources, but certainly on the finance side, USDA. And when we look at the disaster work, what we did, I hope I'm getting this answering the question right, but what we did is we go to the state legislature up front, ask the legislature for operating monies to begin immediately, and give the promise that we'll get federal reimbursement anywhere we can and come back with that. And so we've had good luck going to working with FEMA. And like I said, the more we learn about, pre-awarding contracts and engaging with FEMA earlier, the more that we can have confidence that we can pay back the majority of the stateside money.
Do you want to talk about how the carbon sourcing and the hauling, that was all done by subcontractors, so that they were working for North Carolina Department of Agriculture?
Yeah, right. So during the event, those contractors that I mentioned, they are contracted with us, the Department of Agriculture, and then we as an agency go find those resources. Like I said, it's part state, part federal, but all of those contractors are contracting directly with us by contract, the Department of Agriculture.
Okay, we're going to take one more question, and then we're going to close it out. What was the range of cost per bird?
I don't know if we brought it down by bird. We've gone in every direction you can. That's one direction that we haven't gone. I could do some homework on that to try to make that go. I would say, maybe trying to come up with by house or by square foot or something like that might be a little easier to get at, but we haven't done that. I apologize.
Okay. Well, Joe and Robert, I want to thank you guys. This is a great, interesting webinar. And on behalf of the BS Training and Exercise Program, I thank you for doing this. We also will be able to get you the chat questions so that you can see what questions and also the attendance record, so you have that so you know who was signed on. I think at the highest I saw there was 194 people, so that's pretty cool. And so the next question I have for you is they've been asked, a couple people have asked if they could have a copy of your slides.
Sure. Absolutely.
Okay, so what I'll do is I'll put them into a PDF format, and I'll email them out to everybody that I have their email address.
That's great. Yeah.
Okay, and I just want to thank everybody for joining today. I do have 2 more webinars coming up. We have one on Monday at 11 a.m. It's the United Kingdom's Preparedness and Delivery Model for a Highly Pathogenic Avian Influenza Outbreak. And on April 1st at 1 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time, we have an overview of lumpy skin disease. So just wanted to throw that out there. Those announcements have been gone out, but the reminders will go out again. So, and with that, I'd like to wish you all a great afternoon.
Thank you. Thank you.